The last metallic scrape of the scoop against the bottom of the formula can echoed in the silent kitchen, a sound far louder and more final than a gunshot. Alara stared at the meager dusting of white powder that clung to the blue plastic. It was not enough. It would not be enough for Leo's morning bottle, let alone the rest of the day. Her gaze drifted from the empty can to the eviction notice taped to the refrigerator, its stark red lettering a constant, screaming reminder of their failure. Her failure. The single digit glowing on her banking app confirmed the totality of the disaster. $7.14 stood between her and the abyss. A soft whimper came from the living room, where Leo was stirring in his playpen. His small sounds were a ticking clock, each one counting down the minutes until hunger would turn his whimpers into full-throated cries. Panic, cold and sharp, coiled in her stomach. She had called everyone. Her friends were struggling just as much. Her family was a constellation of burned bridges and forgotten phone numbers. There was no one left. Pride was a luxury she had shed weeks ago, but desperation was a far heavier cloak to wear. Her phone buzzed on the countertop, a lifeline she had almost given up on. It was a text from a catering company she had worked for sporadically before Leo was born. A last-minute cancellation for a black-tie gala tonight. 5 hours of work. Cash in hand at the end of the night. It was not a solution, but it was a reprieve. It was formula. It was one more day. Her fingers trembled as she typed her acceptance. The single word, yes, feeling like both a surrender and a victory. Hours later, Alara stood in a different world. The ballroom of the Sinclair Grand Hotel was a galaxy of shimmering chandeliers and hushed, important voices. Men in tailored tuxedos and women in gowns that cost more than her yearly rent drifted past her, their laughter like the clinking of fine crystal. She moved among them, a ghost in a crisp black uniform, her tray of champagne flutes held steady by sheer force of will. The opulence was suffocating, a physical weight pressing down on her, highlighting the chasm between their lives and hers. Every sip of champagne they took could have bought 2 cans of formula. The thought was a bitter pill she had to swallow over and over again. She tried to make herself invisible, to become part of the machinery that made a night like this run smoothly. She kept her eyes down, her movements efficient, her face a mask of polite neutrality. But then she saw the girl. She was small, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, with dark, solemn eyes and hair the color of polished mahogany, tied back with a simple black ribbon. She stood near the base of a sweeping marble staircase, a solitary island in the swirling sea of adults. Her dress was a confection of deep blue velvet, simple but exquisitely made. She was not crying or fidgeting. She was just watching, her stillness a stark contrast to the vibrant energy of the room. What struck Alara was not just the girl's solitude, but the way everyone's gaze seemed to slide right past her. Even the man who was clearly her father, a tall, imposing figure with an air of command that radiated from him like a low hum, seemed oblivious. He stood a few feet away, locked in a tense conversation with another man, his handsome face a mask of controlled frustration. He gestured sharply, his voice too low to hear, but his intent clear. Business. Always business. The girl's eyes followed him, but there was no expectation in them, only a quiet, familiar resignation. Alara's heart ached with a pang of recognition. She knew that look, the look of being present but not seen, of existing in a world that was not built for you. As she drew closer on her route to replenish her tray, she saw the girl's small hands move. It was a fleeting, almost unconscious gesture. Her fingers curled and straightened in a pattern Alara recognized instantly. It was a fragment of a sign, the ASL word for alone. The world stopped. The clatter of the party, the murmur of conversations, the soft music from the string quartet, it all faded into a dull roar. Alara's parents had been deaf. Sign language was her first language, the silent, graceful dialect of her heart. It was a part of her she kept tucked away, a relic from a life before Leo, before desperation, before this soul-crushing struggle for survival. She watched the girl for another moment. The man, her father, finally ended his conversation with a curt nod and turned, his eyes sweeping the room before landing on his daughter. He gave her a small, tight smile that did not reach his eyes. He signed something to her, a quick, almost clumsy gesture. Stay, it was a command, not a conversation. The girl simply nodded, her small hands remaining still at her sides. He then turned away again, immediately swallowed by another group of associates. Alara's training, her need to remain invisible, screamed at her to keep moving, to get back to the kitchens. But the image of that small, lonely sign burned in her mind. She could not walk away. Taking a deep breath, she altered her course, her path taking her near the base of the staircase. She stopped a polite distance from the girl, pretending to adjust the flutes on her tray. She caught the child's eye and offered a small, tentative smile. Then, she lifted one hand, her movements slow and clear. "Are you bored?" she signed. The little girl's eyes widened, a universe of shock and disbelief contained within them. Her head snapped up, her posture straightening as if jolted by an electric current. For a second, she did nothing, her gaze darting from Alara's face to her uniform, as if trying to reconcile the two. Then, her own hands, hesitant at first, then gaining confidence, flew up in response. "You know how to talk with hands?" she signed, her expression a mixture of awe and excitement. Alara's smile widened, genuine and warm for the first time all night. "It was my first language," she signed back. "My name is Alara. What's yours?" "Lily." The girl signed, a real smile finally blooming on her face, transforming her solemn features into something radiant. "No one else here talks with hands. Only Papa. But he's always busy. He looks very important," Alara signed, glancing at the man who was once again engrossed in a discussion, his back to them. "He is," Lily signed, a hint of her previous solemnity returning. "He owns everything." Her small hand made a sweeping gesture that encompassed the entire opulent ballroom. From across the room, Julian Thorne felt a prickle on the back of his neck, a sudden shift in the atmosphere that had nothing to do with the billion-dollar deal Marcus Vance was trying to corner him into. He held up a hand, cutting Marcus off mid-sentence, a move that made the other man's jaw tighten in fury. Julian's eyes scanned the crowd, searching for the source of the disturbance. And then he saw it. He saw Lily. She was not in her usual spot, a silent statue by the stairs. She was animated, her face alight with a joy he had not seen in years. Her hands were moving, flying through the air with a speed and grace he could never hope to match. And she was communicating with a caterer. A woman in a black uniform was signing back to her, her expression gentle and focused entirely on his daughter. Julian's breath caught in his chest. It was as if the world had tilted on its axis. He lived in a state of perpetual, grinding guilt over Lily. His signing was functional, clumsy, learned out of necessity after his wife, Anna, was gone. He could give commands, ask basic questions, but he could not converse. He could not share a joke or a story. He could not bridge the vast, silent gulf that had opened between him and his daughter after her mother's death. He provided for her, protected her, but he could not truly reach her. Now, a complete stranger was doing what he had failed to do for 3 years. She was making his daughter laugh. He excused himself abruptly, leaving a sputtering Marcus Vance in his wake, and crossed the ballroom floor with long, purposeful strides. The people who had clamored for his attention moments before now parted for him, like the Red Sea. He slowed as he approached, not wanting to startle them. The caterer, Alara, he heard Lily sign her name, had her back to him, but he could see the rapt expression on his daughter's face. "She has a beautiful name," the woman was signing. "Lily, like a flower." Lily giggled, a silent, shoulder-shaking expression of pure delight, and signed back. "Papa says I look like my mama." Her name was Anna. Julian's heart constricted. He stopped a few feet away. Alara must have sensed his presence, because she turned. Her eyes were warm, a soft, gentle brown, but they widened slightly in surprise as they met his. She quickly straightened up, her professional mask slipping back into place, her hands dropping to her sides. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice a low, pleasant melody. "I was just—" "Don't apologize," Julian said, his own voice rougher than he intended. He looked at Lily, who was now watching him with a new, hopeful light in her eyes. He forced himself to sign, the movements feeling heavy and inadequate. "Are you having a good time?" Lily nodded enthusiastically, then pointed to Alara. "She talks like Mama did." She signed, her movements crisp and clear. Julian's gaze snapped back to the woman. Alara. He took in her features properly for the first time. The exhaustion etched around her eyes, the proud set of her jaw, the strength in her slender frame. He felt an inexplicable pull, a sense of profound gratitude that left him momentarily speechless. "Thank you," he said, the words feeling utterly insufficient. "I haven't seen her this happy in a very long time." "She's a wonderful girl," Alara replied softly. "She just needed someone to talk to." The simple truth of her statement was like a knife to his chest. He made a decision then and there, a swift, impulsive choice driven by a desperation he hadn't realized he was drowning in. He could not let this woman walk out of their lives. "I have a proposition for you," he said, his tone shifting back to the decisive command of the CEO. "I want to hire you. As a companion for Lily. A tutor. Name your price." Alara stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. Disbelief, then suspicion, flickered in her eyes. "Mr. Thorne, I'm a caterer. I'm not a qualified tutor." "You are fluent in a language my daughter needs," he countered, his voice low and intense. "That makes you more qualified than anyone I could find. I will pay you 5 times what you are making now. 10 times. Whatever it takes." The sheer, overwhelming generosity of the offer set off every alarm bell in Alara's head. Men like Julian Thorne did not do things without a reason, and kindness from strangers was a myth she had stopped believing in long ago. He was offering a fortune for something that seemed so simple. It felt wrong. It felt dangerous. "Why?" she asked, her voice sharp with distrust. "You're a billionaire. You could hire the most renowned ASL educators in the world. Why me? A random waitress?" Julian's gaze faltered for a fraction of a second. He looked at Lily, who was watching their exchange with anxious eyes. "Because in the 5 minutes you spoke to her," he said, his voice dropping so only Alara could hear, "you brought back a light in her that I thought was gone forever. Please, just consider it." He pulled a heavy card from his jacket pocket and pressed it into her hand. His personal number. The cash from her catering job felt like a pittance in her pocket compared to the weight of that small, embossed card. The promise it held was terrifying and irresistible. It was a way out. But at what cost? She took the job. She had no choice. The $7 in her bank account and Leo's hungry cries made the decision for her. But she walked into Julian Thorne's palatial mansion 2 days later with her guard held so high it was a physical shield. The house was less a home and more a museum, filled with stark modern art and cold, empty spaces. It was beautiful and sterile, and it screamed of a loneliness that echoed her own. Lily was the house's only source of warmth. The girl greeted her at the door with a beaming smile, immediately pulling her into the living room, her hands already flying, telling a story about a dream she had. Alara felt the tension in her shoulders ease as she fell into the familiar, comfortable rhythm of signing. With Lily, it was easy. The girl was bright, curious, and starved for connection. They spent hours together, reading books, playing in the vast gardens, and simply talking. Alara learned about Lily's love for drawing, her favorite color, yellow, like the sun, and her deep, unspoken grief for the mother she barely remembered. Her interactions with Julian were another matter entirely. He was polite, formal, and distant. He kept his hours, leaving early in the morning and returning late at night, long after Lily was in bed. He would receive Alara's daily reports with a quiet nod, his eyes scanning the words but revealing nothing of his thoughts. Yet, she felt his presence everywhere. She felt him watching her. Sometimes she would look up from a game with Lily and see him standing in a doorway, his expression unreadable, before he would retreat back into the shadows of his study. The arrangement was bizarre. He paid her a salary that was more than she had ever dreamed of, depositing it into her account weekly without fail. He had arranged for a small, beautifully furnished apartment for her and Leo in a safe, quiet neighborhood, covering the rent indefinitely. He asked for nothing in return except that she be there for his daughter. This disproportionate kindness was a constant source of anxiety. She kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the hidden agenda to reveal itself. No one was this benevolent without a motive. One rainy afternoon, a few weeks into her employment, Alara was looking for a new storybook for Lily in the library. It was a magnificent, 2-story room, lined with thousands of books. As she scanned a high shelf, her fingers brushed against a leather-bound photo album tucked away behind a row of classics. Curiosity got the better of her. She pulled it down. The album was filled with pictures of a smiling, vibrant woman with hair the same mahogany shade as lilies and eyes that danced with life. In every photo, she was with Julian. He looked different then. Younger, happier, his face relaxed and open. In many of the pictures, the woman's hands were captured mid-sign, her gestures fluid and expressive. This was Anna. On the last page was a professional portrait of her, and Alara's blood ran cold. While they were not identical, there was a definite resemblance. They had the same heart-shaped face, the same high cheekbones, the same gentle curve to their smiles. A cold dread settled in her stomach. Was this the reason? Did he hire her because she was some kind of ghostly echo of his dead wife? The thought was sickening. It cheapened every moment of genuine connection she thought she had made with Lily, with him. It made her feel like a prop, a replacement part. That evening, she waited for him. She sat in the cavernous living room, the photo album resting on the coffee table in front of her like an accusation. When Julian finally came home, looking weary from his day, he stopped short when he saw her. His eyes went from her set face to the album, and all the color drained from his. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. "Is this why I'm here, Julian? Am I just a stand-in? A ghost you hired to make you feel better?" Julian sank onto the sofa opposite her, the exhaustion on his face replaced by a deep, hollow sorrow. He looked at the picture of Anna, his hand reaching out as if to touch it before pulling back. He was silent for a long time, and Alara thought he might not answer. "No," he finally whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Not a stand-in. A reminder." The confrontation she had braced for dissolved into a confession. He told her everything. He told her about meeting Anna in college, about being captivated by her fierce spirit and the beautiful, silent world she inhabited. He had learned to sign for her, eagerly and passionately, wanting to know every part of her. They had been inseparable, building a life and a business empire together. Anna was his partner in every sense of the word. Then came the crash. It was 3 years ago, on a night just like this one, with rain slicking the roads. They were coming home from a dinner. Marcus Vance, then a junior partner at a rival firm, had been at the same restaurant. There had been words, a disagreement over a pending merger. Marcus had left angry. 10 minutes later, on a dark stretch of road, a car had swerved into their lane. A head-on collision. Anna was killed instantly. Julian and an infant Lily, strapped in her car's seat, had survived. The police ruled it an accident, Julian said, his voice raw with a pain that was still fresh. They said the other driver lost control in the rain. That driver was Marcus Vance. He walked away with a few scratches. There was no proof, nothing but my gut feeling that he did it on purpose. That he saw us, knew it was our car, and took his shot. The revelation hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. The man from the gala. The man with the predatory smile. After she was gone, Julian continued, his gaze lost in the past. The silence in this house became deafening. My signing, which used to be a language of love, became a chore. A clumsy, painful reminder of everything I had lost. I couldn't look at Lily without seeing Anna, and I couldn't connect with her without feeling like a failure. The guilt, it's been eating me alive. I was losing my daughter, Alara. She was drifting away from me, into a silence I couldn't penetrate. He finally looked up, his eyes meeting hers. They were filled with a desperate, heartbreaking vulnerability. And then I saw you with her. You were signing with her, laughing with her, with the same grace and warmth that Anna had. It wasn't about how you look. It was about the life you brought back into her. The connection. You weren't a reminder of what I lost. You were a sign of what I could still have. A sign of hope. I was selfish and desperate, and I'm sorry if I made you feel used. But it was never about replacing Anna. It was about saving Lily. The dam of Alara's suspicion broke, washed away by a flood of empathy. His grief was a palpable thing, a wound that had never been allowed to heal. His actions, which had seemed so manipulative, were reframed as the clumsy, desperate attempts of a drowning man reaching for a lifeline. She saw him then not as a billionaire, not as her employer, but as a father, heartbroken and afraid. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You don't have to apologize," she said softly. "I understand." That night, something shifted between them. The wall of formality crumbled, replaced by a fragile foundation of trust. Their conversations became more frequent, more personal. He started coming home earlier, making a point to have dinner with Alara and Lily. He asked her to teach him, to help him improve his signing. The lessons were often clumsy and filled with laughter, but with each one, the distance between him and his daughter closed a little more. Alara found herself not just teaching a language, but helping to rebuild a family. She also found herself falling for him. She saw the man beneath the stoic CEO, the devoted father, the wounded husband, the inherently kind man who had rescued her and her son without a second thought. She saw the way his eyes softened when he looked at Lily, and the way they sometimes lingered on her with an expression she was too afraid to name. As their bond deepened, however, a shadow began to stretch over their newfound happiness. Marcus Vance had not forgotten his humiliation at the gala. He saw Alara's presence in Julian's life not as a domestic arrangement, but as a new strategic alliance. He saw the change in Julian, the renewed focus and strength, and he knew she was the cause. He began to see her as an obstacle, one that needed to be removed. The attack started subtly. A smear piece in a gossip column, hinting at a gold-digging nanny with a mysterious past. An anonymous, baseless complaint filed with Child Protective Services regarding Leo's welfare, forcing Alara into a humiliating round of interviews and home inspections. Julian's lawyers quashed the threats quickly, but the message was clear. Marcus knew who she was, and he considered her a target. The threat escalated when Marcus launched a hostile takeover bid for Thorne Industries. He claimed to have evidence of financial mismanagement, of cooked books and fraudulent reports that could ruin Julian's reputation and cost him his company. The board grew nervous, and Julian's allies began to waver. Julian was thrown into a frantic, round-the-clock battle to save his life's work. He was confident the accusations were baseless, but Marcus was clever. The data he presented was convincing, and Julian's team was struggling to find the flaw in it, the key to proving it was fabricated. They were running out of time. One evening, Alara found Julian in his study, surrounded by stacks of financial reports, his face grim in the glow of his computer monitor. He looked defeated. "We can't find it," he said, running a hand through his hair. "It's like the numbers appeared out of thin air. They're ghosts, but they're convincing enough to sink us." Alara looked at the spreadsheets on his screen. Before her life had imploded, before she was a single mother working catering gigs, she had been a forensic accountant. It was a skill she had thought was buried along with the rest of her old life. "Let me look," she said quietly. Julian looked at her, surprised. "Alara, it's incredibly complex. I used to do this for a living," she explained. "I was good at it. I find patterns other people miss." He hesitated for only a moment before nodding, a flicker of hope in his eyes. He slid his chair back, giving her access. For the next 2 days, Alara and Julian worked side by side, fueled by coffee and a shared sense of purpose. She brought her meticulous eye for detail, and he provided the corporate context she needed. It was a partnership, seamless and effective. In working to save his company, they grew even closer, the late nights filled with quiet conversation and the unspoken electricity of their growing feelings. Finally, late on the second night, she found it. It was not in the primary data. It was a digital watermark, a tiny piece of corrupted code embedded in the metadata of the files Marcus had leaked. It was a signature, a digital fingerprint of a hacking program known to be Marcus's preferred tool for corporate espionage. But it was more than that. The watermark contained a hidden, encrypted ledger. "What is it?" Julian asked, leaning over her shoulder, his breath warm on her neck. "It's his ghost," she whispered, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "It's a list of untraceable payments, funneled through offshore accounts. Look at the dates." She pointed to one specific transaction. "This one, a large, anonymous payment made the day after Anna's accident." The air left the room. It was the proof he had sought for 3 years. Marcus had not just been a rival. He had been a murderer who had profited from it, likely by shorting Thorne Industries stock in the immediate aftermath of the tragedy. He had killed Anna and was now trying to steal their legacy. But Marcus was not a man to be cornered easily. He must have had a mole inside Julian's company, because the next afternoon, while Julian was in an emergency meeting with his legal team, Marcus showed up at the mansion, unannounced. Alara was in the garden with Lily and Leo when she saw him striding across the lawn, his face a mask of cold fury. She quickly ushered the children inside, her heart pounding. "You're a clever woman," Marcus sneered, cornering her in the grand foyer. Too clever for your own good. You should have stayed a waitress. Get out of this house, Alara said, her voice steady despite the fear that was turning her blood to ice. I don't think so, he said, taking a menacing step closer. You have something I want. That data you found. You're going to delete it, and you're going to disappear. Or that cute little boy of yours might have an unfortunate accident. It happens. The threat, so blatant and vile, erased her fear and replaced it with a white-hot rage. Before she could react, a blur of motion came from behind her. Lily, who had been hiding in the doorway, launched herself at Marcus, beating her small fists against his legs. It was a futile but fiercely brave act. Marcus shoved her away impatiently. Lily stumbled and fell, her head hitting the edge of a marble table with a sickening crack. She lay still. Something inside Alara snapped. She flew at Marcus, a protective fury giving her a strength she did not know she possessed. But he was too strong, grabbing her wrists in a painful grip. That was a mistake, he hissed. Get your hands off her. Julian's voice was deathly calm. He stood in the main doorway, his face pale with rage, his phone in his hand. The security team was right behind him. Marcus froze, realizing he was trapped. He let go of Alara, who immediately rushed to Lily's side. The little girl was stirring, a large goose egg already forming on her forehead, but she was conscious. The confrontation was swift and final. The evidence Alara had found was irrefutable. Combined with his assault and threats, Marcus Vance was ruined, professionally and personally. He was led away in handcuffs, his empire crumbling around him. In the quiet aftermath, as a doctor checked on a shaken but otherwise unharmed Lily, Julian pulled Alara into his arms. He held her tightly, as if he would never let her go. He's gone, he murmured into her hair. It's over. You saved us, Alara. You saved my company. You saved my daughter. You saved me. She looked up at him, her heart full. We saved each other, she whispered. He lowered his head and kissed her, a kiss that was not born of frantic relief, but of a deep, certain, and undeniable love. It was a promise of a future, a sealing of a bond forged in desperation and solidified in crisis. 1 year later, the autumn sun cast long, golden shadows across a sprawling park. Laughter, both spoken and silent, filled the air. Leo, now a confident toddler, chased after a giggling Lily, his small legs pumping. Lily signed to him as they ran, and he, in his own childish way, was beginning to understand, often signing back with clumsy but enthusiastic gestures. Alara sat on a checkered blanket, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly. She watched them play, a feeling of profound peace settling over her. She was now the chief operations officer of the Thorn Foundation, the company's philanthropic arm, a role Julian had created for her, insisting her insight and compassion were exactly what it needed. Her old life of quiet desperation felt like a story that had happened to someone else. Julian sat down beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. He followed her gaze to the children. Look at them, he said, his voice soft with wonder. Alara leaned her head against his shoulder. They have their own language. He smiled and turned to her, his eyes full of the love that had become the steady anchor of her world. He lifted his hand, his movements no longer clumsy but fluid and sure, a language he had reclaimed not as a memorial to his past, but as a celebration of his future. I love you, he signed. With a heart so full it felt like it might burst, Alara brought her own hand up and signed back, the simple, graceful gesture encompassing everything they had overcome and everything they had built together. I love you too. She looked from her husband to their children, a new family unit born from an accidental encounter, a shared language, and the kind of hope that only blooms in the wake of despair. She thought of the empty formula can and the eviction notice, of the moment of crisis that had felt like an ending. She now knew it had not been an ending at all. It had been the beginning of everything.